smallpox virus, a once and future threat, the
Are you seeing and hearing it? Oh, okay.
smallpox curse, as we look at National Geographic's Extreme Planet. Curse, as we look at National Geographic's
My body,
I had scabs all over.
my body.
Died.
Of milk. Siberia, the Federation of Russia. Vector Laboratories, once the Soviet Center for Biological Warfare Research. Inside these locked rooms, down these hallways, there is enough smallpox to infect every man, woman, and child on Earth.
Did you catch that? Now, there's going to be a Russian defector speaking later, and he's hard to understand, but he's going to say that there's 20 tons of the smallpox virus at this facility. And it was when it was a part of the Soviet Union. And they just mentioned that there's two places where it's supposed to be stored. That's this Vector Lab in Siberia and Atlanta, Georgia at the CDC.
Here, research with the lethal virus continues. This is one of the only 2 authorized repositories for smallpox in the world. The other is in the United States at the Centers for Disease Control. What troubles Russian and American scientists today isn't what's inside these buildings, it's what isn't. It is now believed that hostile nations, even terrorist groups, have obtained smallpox samples illegally, stockpiling the virus for possible use as a bioterrorist weapon. Even a small release of the virus would be catastrophic. Just one case of smallpox would be a global emergency. Today, no one is immune to smallpox. No one outside the military has been vaccinated against the disease since 1979. And there is no cure. It wasn't so long that the world knew these symptoms by heart. The tiny red spots that turn into boils and blisters. The skin that bloats with pus and darkens with scabs. This was the face of smallpox. It is believed that no other infectious disease in history has killed more people, including the Black Death of the Middle Ages. Variola major, the largest of the known viruses, yet still so small that 3 million of them laid end to end would only be as big as a pen point.
I wonder if he meant to say the head of a pen. That'd be a lot to go across just a point. So it's a possibility it was the head.
It is lethal and airborne. When an infected person speaks, particles travel through the air. Breathing these particles is all it takes to come down with the disease. After a 15-day incubation, it infects the blood. High fevers, headaches, and muscle pains begin.
You see the patients, they're alert, they're obviously in pain, they absolutely feel miserable. And as you walk through the hospital, you can pretty well tell which ones are going to survive, which ones are going to die. There is a penetrating, acrid odor, nothing like you ever smelled before. You know it's smallpox just from that. And after walking through this with an English physician, he'd said, I never want to go on rounds ever again. And he'd spent years in Africa treating all sorts of different diseases.
Muhammad Ahmed contracted smallpox in India when he was 31. He remembers the symptoms all too vividly.
Notice his complexion before smallpox.
July 57, I had gone to see my in-laws in the city. So I got fever. I laid down in the bed and I could not get up for many days. So the fever went on increasing, and after about 12, 13 hours, there appeared white, small boils on my body, all over the body. And when they grew bigger, they were touching each other. So the whole body was just like one boil. All over the body, the swelling was there. So much so that my eyes were open just the width of a needle. Not only that, the smallpox boils poked my nails. It was so painful. I became so weak, so weak. I was not able to even move my finger myself. I was not able to move my hand to turn it upside down or move my head to right or left. I used to say in a low voice, my wife used to understand, and my wife used to move my head the way I wanted, this side or that side. And she used to think herself that I might be tired of lying flat or lying on one side. Slowly she used to move me to the other side herself. She was 18 years at that time. 4 doctors came together. They stood near the door. 3 of them, they refused to enter into my room when they saw my condition. There was the 4th doctor told me, I never saw such a bad patient of smallpox in my life. He put his hand on my chest and said, his heart is sinking. If there is anything in your religion to be read before a person dies, you start reading that one. It took about 3 months for me to come to a normal man. When I peeped through the window, outside I thought, oh God, are the trees so green? Oh my God, are the flowers so beautiful? Everything looked to me as if new, as if I have come from another world.
Muhammad Ahmed survived because his heart and immune system were strong. But others were not so fortunate. For these victims, the virus attacked the internal organs in rapid succession. Some succumbed to blood poisoning, others to heart attack, but most faced massive hemorrhaging of the lungs or intestines, or died from widespread secondary infections of the pox sores themselves. At this stage, death comes in 3 to 5 days.
Up next, the District, a strategy to destroy Native American nations with smallpox. When National Geographic's Extreme Planet continues.
Individuals, it also devastated huge populations.
Smallpox changes the balance of power in small groups and families, but with entire nations also. So it's been a very influential disease throughout history.
Over 3,000 years ago, the first recorded smallpox epidemic struck Egypt and today's Syria. Pharaoh Ramses V was killed by the disease in 1157 BC. His mummy still bears the scars. Soon, pandemic spread across the Middle East. And once smallpox started to travel, it couldn't be stopped. From Asia, Africa, and the Mediterranean, it followed along trade routes, first to Greece and Persia, then onto Europe, sweeping around in the 2nd century AD. Smallpox hit Europe in waves over the next centuries.
1200 AD, what would that have coincided with? Well, it was, yeah, right at the end of it. And so
Renaissance.
remember the circumstances of the Dark Ages? And we talked about the starting over from scratch. We get to part when they talk about Africa and Asia, you're going to see that they had methods for it. When they talk about Europe, you're going to see the impact that the Dark Ages had. So be sure you catch that.
Returning again and again to topple empires and cripple dynasties wherever it erupted. The disease would claim a remarkable string of victims: Italian dukes, Japanese shoguns, Burmese kings, and Ethiopian princes. As for the common people, cemeteries around the world were filled to overflowing. Finally, bodies were simply dumped outside towns and cities without ceremony. Those who survived were often branded, marked with deep-pitted scars. To some, this lifetime of disfigurement was worse than an early death. In 1562, 29-year-old Queen Elizabeth I was diagnosed with smallpox and soon after fell into a coma. When she awoke, she was shocked by the pustules on her face. Blow to her vanity, especially in light of the lifelong rivalry with her cousin, the beautiful Mary, Queen of Scots. Her doctor allayed her fears and gently reminded her that she should be grateful to be alive. Elizabeth remained in seclusion until her scars had disappeared.
You think the artist kind of helped the queen out there? Yeah, that was early days Photoshop in there. There's no way her scars disappeared.
Others never came out of hiding. Christian monasteries became popular refuge for European women whose beauty and prospects were destroyed by the pox.
Prospects for what?
Not just in Europe, but all around the world, victims were shunned for their scars.
In many of the Eastern cultures, it is your karma that brings you bad luck. I had that smallpox marks on my body, and I was like branded as unofficially as some kid that had bad luck. Maybe I had done something bad in my past life that I got smallpox. And I don't think anybody is able to question any of the gods or goddesses, what they do and what they don't do.
The Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas. Cortez, Pizarro. They marched their men across the new land, looking for gold and glory. But it wasn't just their guns or horses that assured their triumph. Smallpox was their greatest weapon. And the disease they carried would change the balance of global power forever. Cortez had only 600 men, Pizarro 200. They were small armies confronting a population of millions. Yet before them, the glorious civilizations of the Aztec and Inca would crumble into dust.
Several years ago, I had Juan Cuica in class, probably 20 years ago. He was full-blood Inca. And when I showed this afterward, he was just flabbergasted. The story of this never passed down to the generation. He had never heard of this even happening. He remembered how that they thought that the conquistadors were gods because they were riding on horses and they'd never seen horses before. But he did not have a clue about what happened here. And listen to the attitude that the conquistadors had and the American, well, the British people that brought it to the Native Americans.
Millions of Inca and Aztecs, a third of Venezuela's entire population. In Mexico alone, the number of inhabitants would drop from 25 million to less than 3 million.
Get that down. That's amazing. What did it start off as? How many people in Mexico?
25 million.
And was it 23 or 25? And after the conquistadors brought the smallpox, what did it reduce the population of Mexico to? 3 million. Devastated.
Within 100 years, smallpox and the cruelty of the conquistadors would reduce the native population in areas of Central and South America by a stunning 90%. To the conquistadors, in their arrogance and their religious fervor, it seemed as if God himself had blessed their mission. Geronimo de Mendieta, a friar in Mexico, wrote,
"Concerning the plagues that we see among the Indians, I cannot help but feel that God is telling us, you are hastening to exterminate this race. I shall help you to wipe them out more quickly."
Smallpox also ravaged North America, wiping out entire populations. European colonists who had built up immunity remained mostly untouched, while Indians died miserably, one tribe after another.
Anybody remember from your American history class how they got it to the Native Americans in America? Nobody.
The blankets?
Yeah. They had blankets that people had been on that died of smallpox, and they traded it with the Indians. So you're going to see that depicted, and you're going to actually see the person that responsible for infecting the Native Americans with it.
Once again, the survivors took a sign from their god. In 1634, Governor John Winthrop of Massachusetts Colony noted that almost all of the region's tribes had been devastated.
For the natives, they are all near dead of smallpox, so as the Lord hath cleared our title to what we possess.
It was only a matter of time before someone thought to use smallpox as a biological weapon. His name was Sir Geoffrey Amherst. When Ottawa Indians threatened his British forts in 1763, this commander-in-chief sent a letter to Colonel Henry Bouquet.
Could it not be contrived to send the smallpox among those disaffected tribes of Indians? We must, on this occasion, use every strategy in our power to reduce them.
Bouquet's reply sealed his place in history.
I will try to infect them with some blankets that might fall in their hand, and to take care not to get the disease myself.
The same tragic fate befell Indians all across North America. They were virgin populations. They had no defense.
Do you know what they mean by they were a virgin population? It means they had never been exposed to it like the people in Europe. So they had no kind of ground zero immunity to it. They were highly susceptible.
As the 18th century dawned, Europe was not to be spared either. A new wave of smallpox raged across the continent. More deadly than ever, it swept through newly crowded cities and attacked the royal houses. Louis XV of France, Queen Mary II of England, Archduke Karl Joseph of Austria, all fell. The Stuarts, the Habsburgs. One by one, Europe's governing families were thrown into turmoil. Second, grandson of Peter the Great, was engaged to marry Catherine Delgarucci in January of 1730 when he was stricken with smallpox. As nobles gathered for the wedding, he fell into a coma. But the Delgarucci family wasn't going to let its chance for greatness slip away. In desperation, they thrust their daughter into Peter's bed as he lay dying, trying to get him to consummate the marriage. It didn't work. Peter died, and the male Romanov dynasty expired with him.
Just ahead, fighting back against smallpox. While many died from fear and ignorance, others developed effective forms of inoculation.
The slaves inoculated each other because of the outbreak.
But it would take a doctor, a young milkmaid, an unsuspecting little boy, and one cow to turn the tide when National Geographic's Extreme Planet returned.
I'm going to back it up because that's a painting of actual, who did the smallpox in England, 1796? What was his name?
Jenner.
Yeah, Edward Jenner. So you're going to see I'm going to stop it. And so there's a painting, and you see him and what was the name of the little boy that he injected? Anybody tell me? That was rabies. Smallpox. James Phelps from the milkmaid Sarah Nelms. So I'm going to stop it when they bring up the painting.
With him.
Just ahead, fighting back against smallpox. While many died from fear and ignorance, others developed effective forms.
Okay, now that's the inoculation there. It puts scabs from a smallpox victim up the nose of children, and they get a mild case, but it wouldn't kill them. And then they'd have immunity. But this is in Asia, where the Dark Ages didn't have an impact.
Of inoculation.
The slaves inoculated each other because of the outbreak.
But it would take a doctor.
So that's him. That's Edward Jenner.
A young milkmaid, an unsuspecting little boy.
Okay, now that's James Phelps, and that's Jenner there. And he's scratching the cowpox into the little boy's skin.
And one cow to turn the tide when National Geographic's Extreme Planet returned.
Royalty and commoners alike, smallpox was a mysterious, terrifying disease that seemed to come out of nowhere. Around the world, people turned to all sorts of remedies and superstitions. For centuries, the color red was believed to have powerful therapeutic effect on smallpox victims. Japanese patients were bathed in sake and beans and kept in rooms with red light and red cloth. In Africa, the color red was associated with the anger of the smallpox god Shapona. Elizabeth I was wrapped in red blankets by her doctor. But there was no cure. The only real method of treatment was prevention, to guard against the disease before it struck. One of the most ingenious examples can be traced back to 11th century China. Children were given smallpox scabs to place up their nostrils. Exposing the youngsters to the disease this way, the Chinese discovered, gave them lifelong immunity. It's said this practice called inoculation began when a famous prime minister, Wang Tan, lost all of his children to smallpox. Granted one more son late in life, he anxiously consulted a Buddhist nun from Tibet. With inoculation, the boy survived, and the nun became worshipped as a goddess of mercy, a goddess of smallpox. Over the next centuries, methods of inoculation spread through Asia, across the Mediterranean.
Notice that was in Asia, and now it's in Africa. But remember, they weren't impacted by the what? Dark Ages.
And all throughout West Africa. In 1706, an African slave would set the stage for the next major turning point in the conflict between smallpox and its victims.
There was an outbreak, who was both a minister and really quite a scientist, noticed that blacks had lower attack rates than whites. And he looked into this and found that the slaves inoculated each other because of the outbreak. And so they had lower smallpox incidence.
Mather discovered that this practice, rubbing a small quantity of disease into the blood, had actually been in use for hundreds of years. Peasants, Asian farmers all knew about it. It was only unknown in the West. But as Mather tried to spread the custom, brought to a rapid halt by local authorities.
Okay, now you're going to see the impact that the Dark Ages had in Europe.
They told him it was uncivilized, unclean. Inoculation, the single best way to stop smallpox, was rejected by almost every Western medical doctor. And religious leaders believed it was wrong to thwart God's will by preventing a disease. Even as smallpox spread, inoculation still remained all but banned in Europe. Doctors opposed the practice. Entire governments went on record against it. It would take a courageous lady of London's high society to challenge the almost all-male medical profession and the way it viewed inoculation. Mary Wortley Montagu, the wife of the British ambassador to Turkey, learned about the practice in 1717 from old women in Constantinople. She had been disfigured by smallpox and swore the same fate would not befall her children. In 1721, Montagu returned from Turkey and influenced her close friend, Queen Caroline of England, to inoculate the royal children. Royal patronage began to make the process respectable. Little by little, the taboo was lifted. The ramifications of Montagu's idea took a long time to be fully understood. In 1796, an English country doctor named Edward Jenner suspected that milkmaids might be immune to smallpox after contracting another disease, cowpox. Jenner found that cowpox produced only minor symptoms. Could it actually leave a person immune for life to the more deadly smallpox virus? Jenner tried a dangerous experiment. He obtained a cowpox sample from the hand of milkmaid Sarah Nelms and injected it into a young boy, James Phipps. Several weeks later, he administered a dose of smallpox to the boy and waited. The child did not contract the disease. The world's first vaccination was a success. It made them all famous, even the cow.
The relationship between inoculation and vaccination is very interesting because inoculation uses the smallpox virus. Vaccination, on the other hand, uses a different virus.
Everybody clear on the difference between inoculation and vaccination? Everybody get that, the difference? Which one used the actual smallpox virus?
Inoculation.
Inoculation. Vaccination used a different virus. And what different virus did Jenner use?
Cowpox.
Cowpox. What was the Latin word for cow?
Vaca.
Vaca, and that's why he named it a what? Vaccine. Now, do you understand something about Pasteur's character? He didn't understand it, but then when he stumbled onto it with the chickens, he honored Jenner by continuing to call it a vaccine, honoring Jenner's work with cowpox.
Building on the knowledge of centuries, Jenner's vaccination was the defining moment in a battle fought over thousands of years. By the 1800s, armed with vaccines, doctors were making their first inroads against smallpox. But this is a disease that would not go down without a fight.
Coming up, stopping an infectious juggernaut. How a divided world came together to perform a medical miracle.
We had a very excellent vaccine, which protected with a single inoculation.
Village by village, shot by...
Now, when you see them inoculating people, notice the difference. They're not doing it with the syringe, doing it subcutaneous or intramuscular. They're just pricking the skin, just very shallow, putting the actual cowpox viruses under their skin. And you actually got a cowpox infection. And so your grandparents' generation had to have this before we could start to school. And so that big old scab that formed was an actual cowpox infection or lesion.
When National Geographic's Extreme Planet continues. But first, take the GeoChallenge. President's personally administered smallpox vaccination. Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, or Andrew Jackson? The answer is A. Thomas Jefferson vaccinated many of his neighbors and family members. He also provided the vaccine to several Native American tribes. Now back to the smallpox curse.
By the beginning of the 20th century, the world recognized that Jenner's method was the best way to prevent smallpox. But scientists were still struggling to make the vaccine available to everyone. At first, they resorted to bringing cows door to door. Later, they developed the more sophisticated mass production of freeze-dried vaccine. In the years of World War II, Jenner's vaccination became commonplace in nations around the globe. In schools, hospitals, and military barracks, people bared their arms for the jab of the needle. A moment's pain for years of immunity. And as the vaccine made its way to the more distant corners of the planet, doctors began to wonder if the days of this scourge might finally be numbered.
The idea of eradicating a disease is a very potent idea, because if you can do it, then you have to do something only once in the entire history of the world, and it's finished.
It would take an extraordinary showing of global unity. In the mid-1960s, even as the world was torn apart by the Cold War, almost every nation on Earth came together under the World Health Organization, voting on a shared mission to destroy smallpox. Dr. D.A. Henderson was the director of the World Health Organization's smallpox eradication campaign.
We had a very excellent vaccine, which protected with a single inoculation. And individuals who got the disease and could spread it always had a rash. So we could always tell where it was. And we always knew that any case we found had been in contact with another case. So we could follow this back, vaccinate in those areas, and prevent the disease from spreading.
Medical officers like Dr. Wilkie set out across the globe to battle the disease.
Now, we started with the concept that you had to do mass vaccination of everybody. Then we also found that if you went to a village and vaccinated everybody in the village, you'd be surprised by more cases 2 weeks later. And suddenly, we had to ask whether there was an easier way to do all of this.
They did.
People would hide from it or hide their family members from it. So it was hard to get everybody.
Developed a new approach, surveillance containment. It focused on finding the disease and protecting the risk.
And then we started village by village searches. We go into a village, we talk to the chief, and what we learned was people don't tell you a lot. But then we started going to schools, and we would show a picture of a child with smallpox to the children in the school and ask, has anyone seen a disease like this? And kids volunteer right away where it is. And so that turned out to be a good source.
Little kids will spill the beans on you, won't they? Uh-huh, yeah.
But then we found that there were other ways to get even better information. To go to every house and ask in every house. Don't just ask the village chief or the school teachers or the school children, but start going house by house.
In village after village, the volunteers went door to door, looking for signs of smallpox.
Now, this is WHO, World Health Organization, that did this from 67 to 77. Every house on the planet.
12, 14, 16 hours a day, they targeted the outbreaks following the smallest leads. And each time the virus appeared, they encircled it, vaccinating everyone in its path to choke off the supply of victims. The new approach worked. By the early 1970s, smallpox had been all but eradicated in many parts of the globe.
The most challenging country to work in was India, simply because of the population density and the amount of smallpox that they had.
WHO workers braced themselves to face what they thought would be 400 to 500 new cases a week in each Indian state.
Okay, catch the number of cases in each state in India per week. And India is kind of like the United States. It's made up of various states, kind of like we are. But they wouldn't expect anything like this. So get these numbers.
The reality turned out to be far worse. In one instance, over 11,000 victims were reported in one state in 1 week. This was 20 times worse than they had anticipated. The workers struggled under the onslaught.
We found that smallpox spread faster than we could ever catch up with it in India. We really didn't know what to do, so we did our best to keep the patients in the village.
And finding the ultimate in surveillance, we offered money. We offered a reward if someone would produce a case of smallpox. And we found a higher percentage of people knew about the reward for smallpox than knew the name of the Prime Minister of India. And when you get to that point, you can't hide smallpox anymore. People will turn in their own mothers in order to get that reward.
Amazingly, it would take less than 2 years for the strategy to succeed. Thousands of cases each week were reduced to zero. The heroic work of the WHO team had paid off.
Coming up, the death of a disease and the birth of a biochemical nightmare. When we come back, Pox Curse.
In 1977, the last naturally contracted case in the world was reported in Somalia.
Okay, here was the last naturally occurring case, 1977 in Somalia. He survived. You're going to see him. 1977, Somalia.
Ali Maleen, a hospital worker. He survived, and in 1980, after thousands of and millions of casualties, the World Health Organization announced the worldwide eradication of smallpox.
Okay, so 1980 is when it was declared eradicated, 1980. You can see why the last time the vaccine was available was 1979. Now, there's still going to be one more case, and you saw it last time, but we were kind of rushing through it. So maybe you can get it better, not so rushed. There's one more case, so be sure you get the conditions, and you'll find out how easily it was to be transmitted.
The very first eradication of a disease in human history. The world had come together to defeat a terrible common foe. The virus was officially eradicated. Lethal power of smallpox. The 1978, the place a laboratory in Birmingham, England. A young medical photographer named Janet Parker was going about her job when she was stricken with a mysterious illness. A floor below, Dr. Henry Bedson, a microbiologist, had been conducting unauthorized experiments with smallpox. Odorless, invisible, a minute quantity was accidentally released. It traveled up through the air vents. A floor above, Janet Parker had no idea what was happening. But the horrifying appeared within days. 1 month later, she was dead. The world's final smallpox casualty. Dr. Henry Bedson was so filled with remorse, he slit his throat before Janet Parker even died. Because of this horrible accident, governments around the world voted to hand in all their remaining research samples of the virus to the World Health Organization. Today, the only 2 caches of smallpox are said to be at the Centers for Disease Control in the United States and Vector in Russia. The smallpox virus has been on death row, scheduled to be destroyed for the past 20 years. 5 times it has been given a reprieve by the world scientists.
That's a giant autoclave where you use like a giant pressure cooker, the way you kill things, bacteria and viruses. But
this virus, responsible for deaths, is now slated for destruction in the year 2002.
It didn't happen.
It will be the first time a biological species will be deliberately made extinct. In a reversal of fortune, mankind now has the fate of smallpox in its hands. Yet, few researchers believe this is a mistake, a dangerous mistake. The destruction of an extremely precious resource. They feel the information gathered from smallpox DNA could help fight other deadly viruses.
Did you catch something right there that's critical? Smallpox virus contained DNA, so it didn't mutate readily, so that's why one vaccine was able to eradicate it. HIV, influenza, and COVID have RNA. They're a retrovirus. Retroviruses mutate more easily because they have to go through more steps, more chances to mess up. That's why you have so many strains of those.
Everything from HIV to Ebola. What might we learn from smallpox about the transmission?
Oh, that's an electron microscope there.
Of viruses, how they attack immune systems, how they jump between species. While scientists have now sequenced the DNA of several strains of various major and successfully mapped the genomes, some believe that this is not enough. That to study the way smallpox works, you need the complete virus, not just a sequence. For these researchers, killing smallpox now might mean burying important scientific information forever. discoveries with real potential for improving human health. But if an increasingly vocal group of scientists is now campaigning to delay, perhaps indefinitely, the destruction of the smallpox virus, there is an even more pressing reason. They believe that the whole idea of destroying the last samples of smallpox is meaningless. They are convinced that the last 2 reserves of smallpox are in fact not the last at all. In 1980, every country in the world was called upon to hand in their smallpox stocks to the WHO. But today, no one is sure who complied and who did not.
It's
Now the scary part.
entirely possible that one or more countries may have deliberately retained smallpox virus despite having had this mandate and having signed a document themselves. And there's really no way we could police this because the smallpox virus, let's say, would be put in a small tube, be only about that big, maybe as big as your finger, would be then deep frozen in a deep freeze. And there are deep freezes all over the world, and there's no way that anyone could possibly inspect all of those virus laboratories. So it is speculated that there are a number of countries from North Korea to Iraq and Iran and Libya and Syria, India, Pakistan, may all have been working to some degree with smallpox.
In some countries, like the USSR, they were actually making brand new smallpox virus up until 1990.
This amount was about 20 tons. I was overseeing this work.
Okay, this is the Russian defector, and he just said that they had 20 tons in that vector facility in Siberia. So you struggle, maybe you can understand him.
May I speak to Congressman Weldon?
Today, Russian defector Ken Alibek is a biodefense strategy consultant in the United States. A decade ago, he was a chief scientist at Vector in Siberia.
I became one of the scientific leaders of this program, the program to develop biological weapons in the Soviet Union. And the Vector facility involved in developing viral biological weapons, including smallpox weapon, was one of my facilities.
Experts fear not all of Russia's 20-ton stash is accounted for. Rogue nations need only to obtain a small sample of the virus to mass produce an arsenal of smallpox weapons.
One of the very difficult problems we face with biological weapons is that they can be carried across borders. Only small amounts are needed to cause immense damage. There is no way that you could detect these in a suitcase, and so they could be carried very readily from one place to another.
For some countries, it could be very appealing to have this virus in stocks, because we know now that the entire population of Earth is vulnerable to this virus. Nobody is vaccinated against this virus. This weapon would be unbelievably powerful, and we have no protection at all.
With a biologic event, you won't know it's happened. It's released, it's silent, it will drift across a city, tasteless, odorless, invisible. There's an interval roughly of 2 weeks after it's happened before people become ill. And within 3 to 4 weeks, we'd be out of vaccine. And so there's nothing you can do with spacesuits or decontamination devices, anything else.
Scientists now believe that there is no greater biological threat in the world than smallpox. Evil enough to do it.
There are people willing to do anything in order to reach some objective that we might not even understand.
This is made before 9/11. Was his statement proved to be correct there? Yeah.
And therefore, I have to conclude that there are people who would use smallpox as a biological warfare agent if they had it available.
Some terrorist organizations understand that this virus is a very virus, and it could be used in biological terrorist attacks.
Within the next 10 years, there's going to be at least one episode. It's becoming increasingly clear that there are individuals who are going to use biological weapons at some point.
If I have time at the end, I'll tell you about one that we dodged a bullet on, if I have time.
There's nothing we can do about that except to put the pressure from the world community on those countries to destroy it. And should any one of them turn up with the virus, this would be one of the great crimes against humanity.
And so a nightmare from our past has returned, and the great fire threatens to burn again. This much is certain. Those who have looked smallpox in the face never want to see it again.
Would you agree? It's bad stuff.